According to the website called the Top Tens, you can find it, the top 10 problems in the world today are poverty, war and terrorism, climate change, drug abuse, animal abuse, disease, pollution, population growth, racism, and murder. There are a few things that are missing, I think. Now, no doubt all these are great evils, and some evils listed here might not make your list, and you might add many others to yours. But it's obvious that there are a lot of bad things that are happening in the world. How about these? Did you know that more than 150,000 citizens of Mexico have been murdered since the year 2000 due to fighting between drug cartels? Did you know that there's such a thing as blood farming? In poorer countries like India, people are chained up like slaves and milked for their blood. They are bled as much as 2 times a week, and then that blood is sold for research. It's happening in the world right now. Did you know that there are nearly 30 million slaves worldwide currently? That's more than at any other point in human history. Did you know that because countries like China and India have less public opposition to genetic modification and gene editing, they are freer to make use of medical technology for the purpose of creating designer babies? This means that China could potentially have enhanced humans in the very near future. It's scary. Now, these are just a few examples of blatant evil that are present in our world. And you add to that the political corruption at almost every level, in every corner, not only of this country, but of the world. You add to that the worldwide abortion rate at 75 million annually. You add to that greed and selfishness that are epidemic and have just increased the oppression of the have-nots. And the blatant disregard for God and His ways, resulting in rampant sin from God's perspective of every kind. God's best for humanity has been abandoned in favor of what is right in my own eyes. We could add so many other evils to these lists. Evil seems to be out of control in our world. And then when I took a good, honest look at myself, and I observe my own sins and failures, and note how little progress I seem to be making against them. It's easy to see why some would come to the conclusion that it's not worth the effort to try to be righteous. The devil is winning, and if you can't beat him, join him. Why should I try to be good? I can't be anyway. I might as well make the most of it. It's the attitude of many people. King David, at one point in his life at least, was tempted to give up trying. There didn't seem to be much of an advantage to being a righteous person. Everywhere he looked, he saw the wicked flourishing. The world just seemed set up for their success. He complained about it once. He wrote in Psalm 73 these words. He said, "As for me, my feet had almost slipped. I nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." This morning, we come to the fourth of my 5 favorite Psalms. It is Psalm 37. In Psalm 37, it looks as though the wicked are flourishing once again, and we get the impression from what David writes here that he might be getting discouraged and that he might be beginning to think again that it's not worth the effort to be righteous. In verse 35, he writes, "I've seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree." But as he considered the matter more and recorded it in this psalm, he was able to contrast the wicked with the righteous and include that not only is the righteous lifestyle better, but so is the fate of the righteous. And then he surmises that it is worth it to follow God in his ways. Maybe you've wondered something similar to David with what he was struggling with. The way to get ahead in this world is not necessarily through honesty and integrity anymore. It's just business, they say. What that means is that one must be cutthroat and unfeeling toward others as he claws his way to the top. What that means is she takes advantage of others and uses them to get what she wants. Cutting corners and finding legal loopholes and even disregarding laws are commonplace as the successful grow more rich on the misfortune of others. If you want to get ahead in this life, it doesn't seem like you can play fair. And as for morality, that's a moving target in our world. It changes so much. Most people don't even know what the Bible says about it, much less hold to biblical values. As a result, most today don't even think of God as the ultimate authority. What has replaced him is our feelings. What I feel is what is right or wrong. What makes me happy is what is right. What makes me unhappy is what is wrong. And if anything stands in the way of what I think will make me happy, well, that is my enemy. Especially Christians who think that God has something to say about the rightness or wrongness of what I feel. Our society, I think, is sliding out of control downhill in that direction. If you want to succeed in this world, you better jump on the toboggan. Because otherwise you'll be climbing slowly against the grain, and it's possible that you're going to get run over by it. So, are you getting in the toboggan? Is it worth it to go against the tide and to follow God, who is obviously being ignored by the rest of our society? Many believers are in that toboggan or are clinging to the sides of it. Now, David struggled with this in his day. And Psalm 37 is his measured examination of the pros and cons of following the crowd versus following after God. Now, as we go through it this morning, there are 40 verses. And once again, we're not going to approach it on a verse-by-verse basis, nor are we going to read it all. The way the psalm is arranged is a series of couplets, where within the couplet, the righteous is described, and then the wicked are described, or the wicked are described and the righteous is described. And that would be a redundant approach to that. So what I'm going to do is take a survey of what this psalm says about the righteous and what it says about the wicked. And first we're going to look at the actions of the wicked, and then at the response of the righteous. And then we're going to see the fate of the wicked in contrast to the hope of the righteous. Because when David did this, it was this contrast, especially with the fate of both, that caused him to be encouraged to move forward following after God. So how does David describe the actions of the wicked? How the wicked get ahead in life? The term wicked is a broad term to describe those who have abandoned God's ways. They are seeking to make their way successfully in this world with little or no regard for the authority of God over them. They'll do anything to flourish, and David says this is how they do it. First of all, they plot against the righteous. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, it says in verse 12. It's kind of a scary accusation to make against another, that they actually hate people who do right so much that they scheme a way to bring them down. You don't gnash your teeth at somebody you like. Do you ever feel like there are a whole lot of people today who don't exactly like Christians? Now, some of it is deserved. Some of that disdain we have brought down on ourselves by the outrageous behavior of some of those who claim to represent Jesus. But the reality is, if we commit to follow God in His ways, we will be at cross purposes with most of our world. A biblical stand on sexuality, for example, will be directly opposite to the current mood of our society. And rather than always screaming about how wrong society's thinking is and its behavior is, perhaps we would be more effective moving forward by showing it a better way in this area. God's designed way. Our world needs to see strong, committed, godly marriages between two people who love each other in every way. Our world needs to see men respecting women instead of using them as playthings. It needs to see single adults remaining pure for the sake of Jesus instead of falling into the sexual patterns of what is normal in our world just because that's the way it is. If we live distinctive lives sexually, which we are called to, if we live distinctive lives, period, which we are called to, some will be attracted to Jesus, which is our mission in this world. Some will think we're nuts, and others will hate us. Because deeds done in the light will always expose the ugly underbelly of that which is in the darkness. And so the wicked will plot ways to bring us down. They think it'll make them feel better about how they're living. If you study the history of philosophy, especially within the last 200 years, you will note that much of the change in the thinking in our culture is drawn from those philosophers as a reaction against Christianity and its sexual mores. It's interesting that the religion that seems to bring the strongest negative reaction today is not Islam, which is openly anti-gay and oppressive of women. Rather, it is conservative biblical Christianity. It stands in the way of how many people want to live out their sexuality in direct opposition to God's design. And so increasingly, I believe we can expect the tide to turn against us in this area because people don't think and believe rationally. Instead, they react to their own feelings and to the feelings of others. Truth is how I feel rather than what is true. David describes the wicked as actually lying in wait for the righteous, intent on putting them to death in verse 32. Why? Because if you remove the roadblock, you're free to do what you want, to pursue what you feel will make you happy. So to get rid of the righteous is a way to advance that agenda. I think that day is coming. And I think we need to expect it. It was true in David's day to some degree, and it's been true throughout history, and it may come true again in our future. The wicked plot against the righteous, but who they're really plotting against is God. They hate the idea that they're accountable to Him. So, one of the actions of the wicked as described in Psalm 37 is that they plot against the righteous. What are other actions that the wicked, that David notes? Not only do they plot the downfall of the righteous, but they abuse their power against the disadvantaged. David writes in verse 14, the wicked draw the sword and bend the bow to bring down the poor and the needy, to slay those whose ways are upright. David noted that the instruments of power that the wicked use are used against those who are needy. David often describes the wicked as those who are in positions of power and then abuse those positions at the expense of those God has set them over to protect. History tells that story repeatedly, from the Israelites under the Pharaoh to the feudal lords of the Middle Ages over their peasants to Adolf Hitler over the Jews. Wickedness is epitomized by the abuse of power. Today we highlight things like sexual harassment in the workplace or political favors to overly influential lobbyists or a violation of privacy by governmental agencies or media platforms or governmental overreach, or political correctness. All of these are abuses of power in our day today. They happen in different ways in David's days, and they continue in ours. The wicked will abuse their power over others in order to hold those positions and stay in power. That's a characteristic of those who abandoned God. Not only then do the wicked plot against the righteous and abuse their power, but the wicked are also guilty, according to David in Psalm 37, of dishonest gain. David says in verse 21, the wicked borrow and do not repay. It may seem shrewd to be able to get things for free, but not if in doing so you steal what belongs to someone else. Now, David's here not talking about forgetting to return a borrowed tool. He's highlighting something that is intentional. Getting ahead by oppressing others financially. The wicked take things with no intention whatsoever of paying for it. Our bankruptcy laws here in the United States were intended to protect those who overextend themselves and then find that they cannot repay. It was never meant to be a means by which some grow rich and never repay. Yet we see individuals and corporations who have misused these laws to borrow and not repay. I've seen it in individual lives as they run up bills before they're ready to declare bankruptcy. God considers that to be wicked. Christians, be careful with your finances. Repay your debts. To do otherwise is to align yourself with the wicked. We don't do things that way. We are different financially. That it is legal is irrelevant. Now, this is David's brief survey in Psalm 37 of the actions of the wicked in their pursuit of what will give them an advantage over others in this life. We Christians are to live differently than that. So how do those who follow God respond? Even in times when it seems like the devil is winning and the wicked are flourishing. How do the righteous respond in times like that? What is the response of the righteous? As we look through this psalm, David calls attention to three contrasting responses of those who follow God. In a world where the wicked plot against the righteous and abuse their power and pursue dishonest gain, we who follow Christ, first of all, will respond differently emotionally. When everyone else around us is fearful and afraid because of the scary things that are happening at this time in our world, like they are today, we, in contrast, do not fret. David writes, do not fret because of those who do evil in verse 1. He says again in verse 7, do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Again in verse 8 he says, do not fret, it only leads to evil. We do not wring our hands as believers in Jesus Christ in distress over what we see happening around us because we know that our God is in control and we are His. Do not fret. When everyone else around us is jealous and striving to one-up one another, we are not envious of their success. Success in this world does not define what real success is to God. David writes, do not be envious of those who do wrong, no matter what the outcome of their wrong may be. We are not envious of those who get ahead by shady means. When everyone else is enraged and angry, like they are today, we do not join them in the destructive behaviors that accompany those emotions. We control our anger. David writes, refrain from anger and turn from wrath. The Apostle James noted in the New Testament that human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. Nothing good comes from joining our world in its anger. There is an anger that is righteous. Jesus demonstrated that in the cleansing of the temple. But there's also an anger that is wicked, and we don't join our world in its anger. Now, do you think our world, our society, might take a closer notice of us and the Savior we represent and the message of grace in Him if emotionally we set a contrast to the way our world is behaving today? If we did not fret like it frets, if we were not envious of the things it covets, if we were able to control our anger when those in our world absolutely lose it. According to David, that's how the righteous respond emotionally. But not only do the righteous respond differently emotionally, we also respond differently practically. When everyone else lives as though God does not exist, and so they are not accountable to Him, in contrast, we who know Jesus Christ do good as God prescribes it, and we turn from evil as God commands it. David writes, "Trust in the Lord and do good," in verse 3. And then later on he adds, "Turn from evil and do good." God has revealed to us what good is and what is not. We live by His ways. We do good by loving one another and by treating everyone with respect. We're honest in our dealings and content with what we have. And when we mess up, we repent and we turn away from the sin of which we've been guilty. We're open with our failings and forgive one another when we fail. And then we forgive others when they fail. In so doing, we set a contrast with how most around us in our society are living in relationship to one another. When everyone else is looking out for number one and greedy for personal gain, when some are dishonest and take advantage of their fellow man, in contrast, we are generous with what we have. David writes, "The righteous live generously." He elaborates later when he says, "The righteous are always generous and lend freely." God has given us what He has given us so that we might be generous with others. When others spout nonsense about God and about politics and about morality and about the injustices of our day, the righteous, in contrast, speak truth from God's perspective. David writes, "The mouths of the righteous utter wisdom, and their tongues speak what is just." And where do we learn of wisdom and justice? God has revealed it to us in His Word. We don't learn wisdom and justice from internet websites. We don't learn from it from political parties. We don't learn it from the media. We learn it from God. We speak His truth. No other source is a fountain of wisdom and justice like He is. Truth is derived from the one who is truth. Do you think the world might take a closer notice of us and the Jesus that we represent and the message of grace that we are called upon to share that is in Jesus if practically we set a contrast to the way it's behaving today? If we turned from evil and instead consistently did good, if we were happily generous with what we have, and if we spoke God's truth to the foolishness and injustices of our day, and according to David, that's how the righteous respond in a day like our day. But not only do the righteous set a contrast to the world emotionally and practically, we also respond differently spiritually. When everyone else is doing what is right in their own eyes and then wonder why everything is so messed up, we, in contrast, trust the Lord. David writes, "Trust in the Lord and do good." When everyone is trying to fill the void in their lives with what this world offers and they still keep coming up empty, we, in contrast, take our delight in the Lord. David writes, "Take delight in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart." When everyone else is worried about the future and obsessed with the next disaster that's coming down the pike, we, in contrast, commit our way to the Lord, who knows the end from the beginning. David writes, "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will do it." When everyone else is losing sleep over decisions they think will make or break them, we, in contrast, calm ourselves by laying those matters before our God, trusting that He will do what is best in His own time. David writes, "Be still and wait for the Lord. Wait patiently for Him." When everyone else is depending on themselves or on the experts in this world or on their human leaders, we, in contrast, put our hope in the Lord and in His ways to which we are committed. David writes, "The law of the Lord is on the righteous one's heart." And further, he says, "Hope in the Lord and keep His way." We worship God and are obedient to Him. That is where our loyalty lays. Now, do you think the world might take a closer notice of us and the Jesus that we are called to represent and the message of grace that we are called upon to share it if spiritually we set a contrast to the way it is behaving today? If we trusted in God and took delight in Him, if we committed our ways to God and confidently waited for Him, if we put God's word to memory so that we could live it out before the world and so visibly demonstrate that our hope is in Him and not in some human substitute. According to David, that's how the righteous respond spiritually. We are different. We respond differently because we know God. But one question yet remains. How can you and I, who are righteous because of our faith in Jesus, how can we be able to respond differently in this sin-sick world? How can we do that emotionally, and practically, and spiritually? How? Now, certainly, the Spirit of God within us will enable us because we are indwelt by the Spirit of God. But what helped David in this psalm was the realization of how opposite the fate of the wicked is compared to the hope of the righteous. That's what encouraged him to keep on keeping on. And even though the wicked seem to be flourishing now and the devil seems to be winning, the fate of the wicked is set, and it's not pretty. What is the fate of the wicked, according to Psalm 37? This is their fate. They will be destroyed. David writes, those who are evil will be destroyed, in verse 9. He says wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. He says in verse 28, and he says the sinners, all sinners will be destroyed, and there will be no future for the wicked. What is the fate of the wicked? David writes that the Lord will turn their abuses against them. David writes, their swords will pierce their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. We saw in that one other verse how they use their swords and their bows to abuse others. Here, David turns that around and says, those things will be used against them. What is the fate of the wicked? Their power and their wealth will be broken. David writes in verse 17, the power of the wicked and what they gain by it will be broken. It will not last. What is the fate of the wicked? They will perish and be consumed like the flowers of the field set to fire. David writes, the Lord's enemies are like flowers of the field. They will be consumed. They will go up in smoke. The wicked one will soon pass away and be no more. What is the fate of the wicked? Those who abandon God, those who treat him as though he does not exist, who completely ignore his ways. They will have no future but hell. David writes, all sinners will be destroyed. There will be no future for the wicked. That's sobering. Do you know how many people around you who are good people, who we think they're good people, fall into the category of the wicked because they are ignoring God? They need Jesus, and we're here to tell them about him. That's why we need to maintain a difference in the way that we live, so we show them God's ways, that some may be attracted to it. Because the fate of the wicked is not pleasant. The fate of those who ignore God and scoff at his way of salvation is serious. Though they seem to be flourishing now, it's only for a little while, the length of this life perhaps, and that's all. One day all humans will have to stand before God and give an accounting of their lives. And those who ignore him now and scoff at his salvation will have wasted their lives pursuing what will not last. And that's all they'll ever get. They've exchanged a few years here on planet Earth as over against an eternity with God, where the righteous will flourish forever. And this is our hope. It's not a wish, it's a settled reality because it's been promised to us by God through our faith in Jesus Christ alone. That is the fate of the wicked. Specifically then, what is it that we who have placed our faith in Jesus, what do we do to inherit? What is the hope of the righteous? What can the righteous expect from God in contrast to the ultimate experience of the wicked? Now, I'm going to fly through these because there's so much. And it's not really so important that you get it all down. And if you're a type A person that's got to fill in those blanks, if you got that, I've got a sheet in the back that has all of this on it. What is the hope of the righteous? Our hope is both present and eternal. In the present, David says in verse 6, God will make our righteousness count. He will use us for his glory and for the good of those around us. He'll make our righteousness count today. God will use the meek to inherit the land. He will cause the meek to inherit the land. He values those who do not use the world's strategies to get ahead in this life. He will take care of us. God will uphold the cause of the righteous presently. Verses 17 and 34. He will notice and reward those who follow his ways, if not now, certainly in heaven. And those who follow God can be certain that they are under the constant watchful care of God. Verses 18 and 25. At present, too, trouble will not undo us. Verse 19, this doesn't mean that we'll never experience trouble, but we will not wither under its stress so long as we lean on him. He has promised his presence. Currently, in this day, the Lord will make our steps secure even when we stumble. This doesn't mean that we won't stumble, but God will be there to lift us up and set us on our way again. That's his promise for now. The Lord will be our stronghold in times of trouble. Trouble will come, but God will be our protection. The Lord will deliver us from the wicked. The wicked may harass us, but God will deliver us, either ultimately, like we said last week, or presently. And in the present, God, the Lord, will never forsake us. No matter what, he is there. He's got us. Verse 25. Well, that's what we can expect now That's our hope now. What about forever? And this is what settles the issue, especially for me. We will enjoy peace and prosperity forever. Even though the world seems out of control now, that is our inheritance. Verse 11. We have an eternal inheritance that can neither spoil or fade. Verse 18. We are never forsaken. We are loved by God forever. We have a future with God forever. Salvation awaits us forever. We will be allowed, this is a kicker, it says in verse 34, we'll be allowed to see the destruction of the wicked. He says, he will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are destroyed, you will see it. Nobody gets away with anything. Not ultimately. Again, be overwhelmed like David was at the contrast between what the wicked inherit forever and what we, through our faith in Jesus Christ, have in store for us. In a world that seems out of control, we need that promise. That's what the righteous gain at the hands of a loving, generous, and gracious God, as contrast to the wicked gain for a little while, if at all. Ours is eternal. Theirs will pass away. So, why are we so obsessed with the here and now? Why are we holding on so tightly to what will eventually vanish like smoke? Why are we trying to impress our world? We cannot outcool our world. If we follow Jesus, we're always going to be a little out of step with our world. That doesn't mean that we need to try to be odd. What it does mean is that we are different. We live differently. We're not to be like our world. We're to be distinct from it in practice as well as the reality of our position in Christ. We're to be righteous. The righteous have a future. The rest do not. Let's live like we have a future in this crazy world in which we live. And by the way, it is worth it.